Good morning, Science 10. Welcome to room 15 with Mr. Johnson, of course. That doesn't quite look like my room back there, I know, but hey, I thought it might look a little not too bad anyways. So welcome to week 1, lesson 1. This is the first virtual classes that I'm putting together. And let me just explain a little bit how I think things are going to go, at least for this first week. So right now, it'd be Monday morning. I'm actually doing this Sunday night. My internet access is very slow. Think of 2 tin cans and a string pulled between them, and it's slow. So I'm not going to be trying a live streaming. The quality would just be too poor, but I'm hoping that later on we'll be able to. I do have things ordered, and hopefully they'll be here soon. So I'm thinking, so today we're starting on the topic of genetics. And I want you to watch this video. There are some notes, pages that you can download from the Teams server. At least from there, you might be able to, once I get a website set up, have them downloaded from there as well. Anyways, they're going to be available. They're going to be around. You should have received an email that would have links to these things as well. This video that you're hopefully seeing. So if you can download and perhaps print some of these things out or be making notes as we go along, it will help in the long run. But some of these things we're going to have to figure out as we go along. So be patient with me, be kind and generous to yourselves, and we will get this figured out. So I'm thinking this week is a short week. Today you're having a video. Monday, I'm thinking you probably won't do one tomorrow, but we'll do one on Wednesday. Might have a short little quiz on Friday. I'm going to see how that goes. And I'll use sort of the quizzes to keep up with how you guys are doing and make sure that you're keeping up with the work and so on as we go through. If you do have questions, please do feel free to get hold of me. Through email is always a good way. You can use email, and I've sent you several emails. You should have my email address, able to send me questions and so on that you might have. There's also my Jitsi room that you can always make a point of coming in and seeing what's happening in the classroom. And if things aren't too busy, please feel free to ask questions and join in. Generally speaking, I'm going to be keeping Science 10 as a priority between 9:50 and 11:07. That was your regular class time, and so that if other students come in, I'll help them, but you guys will always go to the top if we're just taking a look at random help at that time. Generally, if I'm doing a streaming class, it would be happening during the regular block B time, and so hopefully things will work out that way quite well. Anyways, let's get to this. I'm going to make some just changes to the screen here through the magic that we've got. And hopefully there you've got Science 10, Week 1, Lesson 1, Genetics. And you should have a copy of this. You perhaps print it out, or you can be making notes as we go along. And as I say, if you have any questions, please ask as we go through. So really the question comes down to, when we start talking about genetics, who do you look like? Do you look like your mom, or do you look like your dad? I was always told I looked like my grandpa. As a kid, I could never quite understand. How can I look like my grandpa? As I got older, I probably do look more like my grandpa when I was remembering. But sometimes you might have your mom's eyes or your dad's nose. Things like that. We have traits. We have characteristics. We have, aspects that we get from one parent or the other. Maybe even something of a sense of humor. One of my sons really has a sense of humor quite close to my own, and it is quite hilarious sometimes. And it's funny because, talking to friends of my dad, they always in later years, they would talk about his sense of humor that he had, and I never really thought he had a sense of humor. Like, he was my dad. Parents don't have senses of humor, do they? But it's kind of interesting to see how these things get passed on. This also brings up the sort of what we talk about, nature versus nurture. When we talk about nature, we're talking about characteristics that you're born with. And when we talk about nurture, we're talking about characteristics that you learn. And this is really quite fascinating because there's a lot of things we would think, oh, that has to be, something that you learn along the way, some characteristic that you learn. And then studies are done to show that there's some pretty big connections to show that a lot of this is nature, that you're born with some of these characteristics. And that's really quite fascinating. In some cases, what they've done is they've taken, they call them twin studies. And they've taken, twins, identical twins, and sometimes these people have been separated at birth. They've been adopted out. And they come back and they take a look and they look at the characteristics years later when they've had no contact with each other, and they show remarkable similarities. There was a video that I was watching one time, and it was talking about the twin studies, and it talked about these two fellows that had been separated at birth, and now years later, they were both firefighters. They had similar, pastimes and all sorts of different aspects to them, things that you wouldn't think would be part of them naturally, but they were there. The similarities were quite apparent. There was two. Another example, I had these two twin women, and they were talking about playing charades, and it was almost like they had a mental connection that they were able to guess these things that on the thinnest of clues. It was really quite amazing. So when we talk about genetics, we're talking about who do you look like and so on. And there's something that I forgot to put down, and that's a fellow named Gregor Mendel. And he is really the father, great term, father of genetics. And he was an Austrian monk. And so he lived in this monastery, closed off, and he would have been really involved a lot, I guess, in the gardens. And he, over the years of growing plants and so on, and growing food for the monastery, he began to notice that there were characteristics that would show up. And one of the things that he really took a look at were pea plants. And he began to take a look at the characteristics of pea plants, from the peas. Were they smooth and round, or were they wrinkled and shriveled? Sometimes they were yellow, and sometimes they were green, and sometimes they had tall plants, and sometimes they had shorter plants. And he began to look at these characteristics. And then, because of how pea plants reproduce, he could selectively isolate and have these plants selectively reproduce, and so that he could breed true traits, or true characteristics, where he could, true organisms, but maybe let's go over there. And so he could say, this pea plant will always produce large green, smooth green peas in a large pod, tall plants, and so on. He could specify what the characteristics were. He knew what they were. And then what he would do is that he would take organisms, plants that were breeding true, they were always growing the same way, and he would cross them. He would take some genetic material from one plant and give it to another plant and see what would happen with the characteristics. And he kept records of statistical records of the peas and so on, and the plants that grew. And he was really meticulous, and he developed these ideas, and he wrote about them and had them published, and then his ideas were forgotten. And this so often happens, that things that people have done get out there, but they don't get picked up. People don't recognize the significance of it. And his information and his ideas were lost. And it was after his death, many years after his death, there were some other researchers, and they were looking into genetics, and they were beginning to find out some of these same things that Gregor had talked about and that had written about and had studied. And as they were doing their initial research, they came across a copy of his, I think it would have been his book, where he had written about his findings and so on. And at that point, they read through it and said, he got it right. This is what we've been doing. This is what we've been finding out. In fact, it probably answers some of the questions that we've had, that we've been coming up with. And it was at that point that they gave the credit to Gregor Mendel, and they said that he is the father of these ideas of genetics. He was the one who worked these things out. And he did it in Austria, in a monastery, with these pea plants. And so really we owe him a lot of our understanding and so on to that. And really choosing pea plants, he was quite fortuitous, was a good choice in terms of how these plants reproduced and how he could follow the traits through from over generations to generations of pea plants. So what do we know now? What we know is this molecule, this thing called DNA. Everyone's heard of DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. There's the DNA. And DNA contains information. And that's a strange thing. It would be like if you were to take a look at a book that was written in Chinese or Japanese, and you were to take a look at the characters, you could tell that perhaps there was some reason why those characters were there, but you might not have any understanding of what it was. But as you sat down to learn the Chinese characters, let's say Chinese characters and the Chinese language, and began to learn and identify what these characteristics mean, then you begin to gain ideas and information. So a book that was filled with random black and white markings now contained a story, a novel type of idea. And that's really what DNA has. It has this information. It has this story. It's the story of you. And all of that is located within this DNA, this long molecule that contains information. I say that and I point that out, and I know that it's not going to be that interesting, or you're not going to really geek out about it, and you might not quite understand, but hopefully eventually, as you think about this more in the future, you'll begin to see that this is really strange, that it contains information. It contains something that has been written into this molecule, encoded within this molecule. And that encoding is to make the characteristics of you, and so on. So anyway, DNA is the heart of it. So, well, what do we know about DNA? DNA is a ladder. We talked about it has sort of a spiral shape to it. And Watson and Crick, they were the researchers who came up with this double helix idea. And they're the ones that came up with the idea that this was what the shape of DNA is. And that it's like a ladder, in essence, that has been twisted around its central core. And that if we were to take a look at the rungs of the ladder, we would see that we have these letters. And these letters, well, let's write down what those letters are. And I know I have those on a sheet of paper, but I have to remember these myself, where we are. It's not like I use these words every day. There we go. So we have adenine. And, oh, these got mixed up. We have guanine. We have cytosine. And we have thymine. Now, I'm not going to have you responsible for knowing the names of these chemicals. I am holding you responsible for knowing that there are 4 of them, and that we use the letters A, G, C, and T for them. Now, I say I had them mixed up because G's and C's always go together, and A's and T's always go together. Well, what does this mean? Well, if we were to take a look, if we could unspiral the DNA, so we have one line of the ladder there, we would see A on this side, and we would see T on this side. A always matches up with T. Likewise, if we had G here, it would match up with the C. G always matches up with C. But we can have C on this side, and we could have a G on that side, and we have a T on this side, we could have an A on that side. And we might have C, C, T, A, G on that side. And then we would know, my froze. Hang on a second, I got to change my battery. Still, don't go anywhere. Oh, I'm losing things. Hopefully you're still recording. Yep, should be. And hey! Come on. There we go. And I'm back. Good. Anyways, so we have A's and T's, G's and C's, C's and G's, T's. So this would be on this side a G, an A, a T, and a C. And so this is how the rungs of the ladder get mixed up. So if we were to split this down the center, then we could redo or reproduce the other side and keep track of it. And in fact, that is exactly what happens in your cells. Because, well, if we think about it, we have our cell, and in our cell, if you remember, is the nucleus, the control center. And in the nucleus is the DNA that has all the commands for you and the cell. Well, how many cells do you have? You have trillions. So how many nuclei do you have? Trillions. And how many copies of your DNA? You're going to have trillions. Each cell contains a complete set of your DNA, a complete copy of the information to make you. And so it's not like there's one copy hidden away in a library or something like that. Each one of your cells has this DNA that tells how to make it you. So how does your cell know to be a skin cell? One of your cells know to be a skin cell, another to be a muscle cell, or a hair cell, or an eye cell, or something like that. That's the amazing part of our bodies and the genetics that are there. And scientists aren't necessarily sure in terms of what's called the differentiation, but it's there, it happens. So even why cells know to come apart to form fingers, so they're not all joined together. It's amazing, amazing stuff. So anyways, when we're talking about genetics, then we have to start about zygotes, because zygote was the first you. So if we think of a zygote, zygote is the first cell. So it would have a cell and it would have a nucleus that contains the DNA. Where did that DNA come from? Well, it came from an egg, which was your mother, and it had a sperm from your father. And when the sperm fertilized the egg, we end up with a zygote. Okay? Well, in each one of your cells, we consider that there are 46 chromosomes. We're going to talk more about chromosomes, but you have 46 chromosomes. That's an even number. It's an even number because 23 chromosomes came from your father and 23 came from your mother. If you remember, I think it was last year, you would have talked about cellular reproduction. And so we would have talked about mitosis and meiosis and meiosis. Mitosis is what happens in each of your body cells, your muscle cells, your skin cells, and so on. Meiosis is what happens in your ovaries if you're a woman, or your testes if you're a man. And where a cell gets broken down and produces an egg or a sperm, where it has half as many chromosomes, 23 in the egg and 23 from the father. So that's where meiosis produces these. Now, an egg and a sperm cell, these are called gametes. That's an M there. These are called gametes. These are the first eggs, or the first parts that all the gametes come together and they form a zygote. And we talk about gametes as being 1N, and we talk about a zygote in every cell after that as being 2N, referring to the amount of genetic material that they have. In essence, a gamete with 1N has just the 23 chromosomes, whereas with the 2N, we're now up to 46 chromosomes. And that's the first cell. And then the cell goes through mitosis and produces 2 cells, and then 8 cells, and then 16 cells, and 32, and it keeps on going and becomes an embryo and becomes you. So anyways, zygotes are the first you. These are the genes. These are the chromosomes. This is the genetic material and the DNA coming through. All right, so you should have a page of vocabulary words, genetics vocabulary. And what I wanted to do is just to go through these words with you. And just so we know that we're all talking about the same, well, so you know the words as I use them. So we have DNA. And so DNA, the script or the story of you. In essence, that's what DNA is. It contains all the genetic material, all the genetic information to make you. So then we talk about a codon. And a codon is a group of, or a set of 3 base pairs. 3 base pairs, what does that mean? Well, that's 3 of your A, T, C's, and G's. Okay? So you might have A, C. That would be a codon. Or you might have G, T, G. That would be a different codon. And so it's a section of the DNA of 3 letters. Now, so what does that mean? Well, you can think of this as a letter of your genetic material, because each of these specifies a certain protein. And you are made, oh, you're not seeing that. Each of those represents a protein. We'll hopefully talk about that. It's called transcription, where it takes the DNA and reads the DNA and creates the protein that the DNA is specifying. It's fascinating how it happens. Anyways, so it takes these things and then creates this protein, and the protein then goes off and does its function. A codon is just a set of base pairs, and the base pair specifies an amino acid that becomes part of a protein. So that's not a protein, so better, the gene makes a protein, amino acid. There we go, that sounds better. So we have DNA, we have codons, groups of 3. we're going to do a fun activity where we're talking about codons and we'll understand where these things come from. All right, so here we have chromosomes. So a chromosome is, well, what can we say about a chromosome? Yeah, it's a package of the DNA. And in some cases, I sort of think of it as a suitcase. Chromosomes are used to package up the DNA, and when the cell is dividing, to move the DNA and make sure that it gets to the right spot. So that's what a chromosome is. And so we talked about having 46 chromosomes in each human being. Other animals, other organisms will have more chromosomes and have fewer chromosomes, depending. We talked about gametes, and so a gamete is a sperm or egg. We would call that a reproductive cell. And we talked about those as being one N, so they have 23 chromosomes. All right. Going on, that brings us to a gene. Oh, what is a gene? So a gene is a portion of DNA, of the DNA in your body. There we go, DNA. That controls or specifies a particular trait. Do you have blue eyes, or do you have brown eyes? Do you have blonde hair? Do you have curly hair, thin hair, thick hair, and so on? That's what a gene is. Then we talked about alleles. And an allele, is a gene with a particular expression. So what does that mean? Well, I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Let's say hair color. An allele might be capital. When we talk about alleles, when we're talking about genes, we are using letters to represent that gene. And that is generally representative of the, sort of the characteristic or what we're taking a look at. Short, tall, blonde, brown, black, those types of ideas. So here might use capital B, and that's for brown hair. And we might use lowercase b for blonde hair. So when we talk about, these would be alleles. They're both talking about hair color. They're both talking about the same characteristic, but they have different expressions for that. So we talk about those being alleles. And this, will make more sense. So then we have dominant and recessive alleles. So a dominant trait, a dominant allele, always gets expressed. You're always going to see that trait show up in the organism if they have that dominant trait. A recessive trait, well, you might say, quite, how's that working? And that's where we're getting to it, because we've been talking about, gametes having 23 chromosomes and then a body cell having 46. And if you're thinking straight, you're going to recognize that for each trait, such as hair color, we have two alleles. We have two sets of genetic information for that one trait. A recessive trait is, so always, a dominant trait always gets expressed, only is expressed if it is the only allele. All right. All these words. Okay, so let's continue on. Then we have phenotype. Phenotype This is the physical expression of the genes. The genotype the genes in a cell. Genotypes can only be inferred. Phenotypes are seen. Genotypes are the letters. So these might be the alleles, might be the genotype for a particular trait. So genotype, phenotype. Well, then we have homozygous and heterozygous because each cell has two traits. So let's deal with blonde hair. Homozygous, well, homozygous means the same. Homo means the same. So if we were talking about hair color, we have brown and we have blonde. Homozygous means that a cell or the genotype might be dominant B, dominant B. That's homozygous. Or that we call it homozygous dominant. Or it could be lowercase b, lowercase b. They're both the same. And this would be homozygous recessive. Recessive, because we're using lowercase letters. Dominant, because we're using capital letters. So then it comes down to heterozygous, and hetero means different. So this would mean capital B, not D, capital B, lowercase b. That would be the heterozygous genotype for this trait. Homozygous means the same, capital B, lowercase b, lowercase b. Heterozygous means that it's different. Okay, here we go on. Autosomal genes. All these words. Autosomal genes mean, autosomal means not a sex-linked trait. I don't know, these are going to be hard to see. Not a sex-linked trait. A sex-linked gene on the X chromosome. Huh? Okay. So when we talk about a human's genes, we talk about the 46 chromosomes. And we talk about whether they're male or female based upon the chromosomes that they have. If they have two X chromosomes, then they are female. If they have an X and a Y chromosome, then it's male. This is the only case where we have this sort of situation. Two X chromosomes. These two chromosomes both contain alleles for particular traits. For an XY, we only have one chromosome, the X chromosome that carries genetic information. The Y chromosome doesn't carry genetic information. I'm not sure that scientists really understand why it doesn't. Maybe, or at least when I was going through school and so on, they didn't really have an explanation why it doesn't. They just know that it doesn't. So we've got the Y chromosome that doesn't carry genetic information. And so males only have one set of information. And that can be hazardous to their health. All right, so we're almost done here. Then we have the carrier. And the carrier is someone who has a recessive trait. and a dominant trait. Because the recessive trait is not expressed. So the recessive trait isn't showing up. So we talk about hair color. So we talk about brown hair and blonde hair. Well, because the brown hair is dominant, someone who has this genotype, dominant B, recessive B, they will have brown hair, but they still carry the gene. They carry the gene for the blonde hair, but they won't have blonde hair. Okay. Then we come to this Punnett square. And the Punnett square is just a device to show possible offspring genes. Wow, what does that mean? Okay, so let's go back and let's create an example. So let's go through some possibilities. Let's say we have a mother and we have a father. Okay. Now let's say the mother is homozygous dominant, which means, and then we're using the brown hair again, which means both of the alleles that she has for that trait are both dominant. And let's say the father, just for fun, is homozygous recessive. So this is the genotype. Genotype for the mother, homozygous dominant, she has brown hair. The genotype for the father is homozygous recessive. He has blonde hair. Well, we want to know what would be the possible genotypes for the children. So to do that, we create a Punnett square. And a Punnett square just looks like this. And so we then take the genes. Because remember that, let's say we have, for the mother, her genotype is capital B, capital B. When she creates the egg, an egg only has one gene in there. So she produces one egg that has that capital B, and she produces another egg over here that has a capital B. Well, those are what her two eggs would be. They just have the capital Bs. But the whole point is that this gamete has only one gene in it. It only doesn't have two, it just has one. So each egg from the mother, the only possibilities would be a capital B and a capital B because she's homozygous dominant. Likewise, for the father, we would have heterozygous, so this would be a B and this would be a B. Now, so all we're doing is we're just breaking these up into the gametes. So these are the eggs, these are the sperm. And so if we have an egg from the mother and sperm from the father, well, this would produce a capital B from the mother and a lowercase b from the father. And then a capital B from the mother and a lowercase b from the father. And if you're quick, and I'm sure you are, you're seeing that that would be the genotype. This B comes down to here, this B comes across to here. So 100% are now heterozygous. 100%, so heterozygous means that a capital B, lowercase b, 100% have brown hair. Because it's the dominant trait. That's the capital B. Because if you have capital B, lowercase b, it's the capital B that happens, that does. So when we have a true purebred, so that's what we mean. So homozygous dominant, that's a purebred for the mother. Homozygous recessive, that's a purebred for the father. when we cross them, we end up with these heterozygous offspring, and all of them will be heterozygous for that trait. Okay, well, let's say I have to save this, and I gotta close it down, and then I get to open it again. It's so exciting, I know. This would be happening in the classroom. You got to realize it's 11:26 on Sunday night, and I'm doing this. It's taken me a while to figure out what I wanted to do with you guys, so this is how it's going to work. It's not there. I have to go to here, and lesson 1 open. Okay. All right, so we've got this here. So now we want to say, well, what would happen? I need my pens back. Come on, I need the right pen and thickness. Okay, so what would happen if we took a heterozygous and crossed with a heterozygous? Now, this comes out of Mendel's talk and so on. And so he would talk about a cross between a homozygous dominant and a heterozygous dominant, and he would call this the F1 cross. And then when he would take a heterozygous and a heterozygous, he would call this the F2 cross, the F2 generation. So then we can see, so these are the genotypes of the parents, and so the possible offspring. Well, here we have a capital B. Here we have a capital B and a capital B. Here we're going to have a capital B and a lowercase b. Now the thing is that by standards, we always put the capital letters first if there is one. So it doesn't matter whether it comes from the mother or the father. And then this would be a capital B, lowercase b, and then this would be a lowercase b, lowercase b. This trait is now being expressed because we have it's homozygous recessive. That will express the trait, where these up here, they don't express the trait. So we can talk about the genotypes. The genotypes, possible genotypes. We have homozygous dominant. How many of the offspring will it be? 25%, 1/4 out of the 4. And then we have heterozygous. What percentage? 50%, 2 out of 4. And then we have homozygous recessive, 25%, 1 out of 4. Those are the genotypes. But we can talk about the phenotypes, the physical characteristics. Phenotype. Well, okay. Capital B, brown hair. Capital B, lowercase b, brown hair. Capital B, lowercase b, blonde hair. So we only have 2 possible phenotypes. We have brown and we have blonde. Oh, not blonde, blonde. There we go. Well, 75% are going to have brown hair. 3/4 of them are going to have brown hair. 25% will have blonde, only 1/4. But that's what we're happening when this is how we use the Punnett square, and this is the type of information we get from that. We can predict or assume what the genes would be, and on average, what percentages will happen. And then we can take a look at the phenotype, and on average, these are the percentages that are going to happen. We can't see the genes. What we can see are the phenotypes. Okay, so let's get you doing a bit of work. A karyotype. Now, a karyotype is a picture of the chromosomes. Now, I've got this neat sheet for you. You should be able to have this downloaded. And the instructions are on the bottom down here. And what you're going to be doing is, what you can do is cut these out, or what you could do would even be go through and number them, and then place those or draw lines or put them in next to the chromosomes on the other side. Each chromosome has a pair. One came from the father and one came from the mother, and so we can match them up. Now, the interesting thing is that a karyotype is a picture of these things, and so, what they've done is that they've ordered them from the longest chromosome to the smallest chromosome. When you take these, they're matching them up according to the size, the shape, and then the bands of colors. And those bands of colors happen naturally, and they correspond in some ways to the genes and so on, the portions that are there. So this is your karyotype. I want you to do this activity. Then, so we've got the karyotype. Do it. What's next? From here. Okay, so we have the karyotype. I want you to do that worksheet. Then there's a Punnett square worksheet. Punnett square worksheet looks like this, and you should be able to get this off the team site. There's 2 pages to it, and it tells you the genes you're supposed to do, gives you a Punnett square, and asks you some various questions. Pretty straightforward. The second page isn't quite so easy because they're telling you, like, it's 2 heterozygous white rabbits are crossed. What's going to be the output for that? What are the offspring going to be like? And then finally, I've got this bikini bottom genetics. So we've got the karyotype, the Punnett square, and the bikini bottom. Goes behind my head. All right. And so this series of questions to go through. There's 2 pages of questions. And then there is the answer sheet. The answer sheet is there so you can know whether you've done it correctly or not. Don't just look at the answer sheet and fill it in. That's going to be pointless. And that, I think, is everything that I've got on here. Yes, it is. So this is the work that I want you to be doing. If you have questions, get in contact with me. Otherwise, plan to see another video. So next video, next contact will be Wednesday. Woo-woo! And I don't know why. I'm tired. It's 11:30. So next video will be Wednesday, and we'll either give some more work or we'll figure out just what needs to happen. I'm not trying to overwork you. I'm trying to work out what's going to work with you and your family, because you might have brothers and sisters having to use computers and meet with their teachers and blah, 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 blah. So anyways, take a look at this. The next video will be Wednesday, and you can expect a short quiz on not Friday, but Thursday, because it's a short week. Okay? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be interesting. We will get things figured out. It's going to take some time, but we will get them figured out, all right? You take care. And so I'm still trying to figure out, how do I end these things? Looking forward. Anyways, from room 15. We'll see you next time. Bye now.